The silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the usual quiet of an early morning, but a deep, hollow silence that felt wrong in my bones. The sun hadn't yet crested the west hills, leaving the Portland sky a soft, bruised gray. I padded into the kitchen, the old floorboards barely whispering under my weight. My routine was automatic: grind the coffee beans, fill the kettle, wait for the familiar hiss and gurgle that signaled the start of a normal day. But nothing felt normal. The silence was too loud. It followed me from the kitchen, a cold draft licking at my heels as I walked down the hall toward my daughter's room. Maddie's door was ajar. Usually, it was shut tight, a teenage fortress of privacy. I pushed it open gently. The bed was made, not just thrown together, but perfectly, military crisp, the way you make a bed when you're not planning on sleeping in it again. The room was tidy, almost sterile, and there, placed squarely in the middle of the pillow, was a single, folded piece of paper. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew, even before I touched it, that this was the source of the silence. My hand shook as I picked it up. It was her familiar, looping handwriting. The note was short. I read the first 4 words, and the world tilted on its axis. Dear Dad, I'm so sorry. In that single, silent moment, my carefully constructed world didn't just crack, it shattered. And the only thing I could think was, how did we get here? To understand how we got there, you have to go back a few weeks, to a time when the silence in my house was peaceful. It was a crisp October evening. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen as I sautéed vegetables, and Claire, my girlfriend, poured 2 glasses of red wine. Our house, the one I'd lived in since my divorce, had finally started to feel like a home again in the few months since she'd moved in. It was filled with her laughter, her scent, the vibrant energy she brought into every room. Claire was the missing piece I didn't know I was looking for after 10 years of being dad first, and David second. At 40, I felt like I was finally getting a second chance at life. A life for me. You know, she said, leaning against the counter, her dark hair catching the warm kitchen light. I was looking at flights to Spain for the spring. I think we've earned it. I smiled, stirring the pan. Spain? Huh? You trying to get me away from my responsibilities? She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. Your biggest responsibility right now is deciding between Rioja and Tempranillo. Maddie's an adult. David, she's got her own life starting. This is our time. She was right. My daughter, Maddie, was 18. She'd just graduated high school with honors. A smart, funny, wonderful kid who was taking a gap year to figure things out. She lived an hour away in the suburbs with her mom, my ex-wife Susan. But we were close. We talked almost every day. And Claire was great with her. She always asked about her classes at the community college, about her job at the bookstore. It was a perfect, modern arrangement. I like our time, I said, pulling Claire into my arms. She melted against me, and for a moment, the world was just the 2 of us, the aroma of dinner, and the promise of a quiet evening. Me too, she whispered, blissfully, gloriously child-free. She said it as a joke, but it was also the foundation of our relationship. When we first started dating, she was clear she loved me, but she had no desire to be a mother. I was clear, too. I loved being a father, but I was done having kids. It was a perfect match. We were building a future for us, filled with travel, quiet weekends, and the freedom to be spontaneous. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. It was a picture of a funny-looking cat she'd seen. I showed it to Claire, and she smiled. She has your sense of humor. Tell her I say hi. See? Perfect. Harmonious. Simple. I texted Maddie back, feeling a deep sense of contentment. My daughter was thriving, and I had found a partner I adored. I had managed to build a new life from the ashes of my old one. Everything was finally in its right place. I had no idea that the foundation of that life was about to be tested by a storm I never saw coming. The storm arrived 3 nights later. It wasn't a metaphorical one. At first, it was a real, classic Portland downpour, the kind that lashes against the windows and makes the whole world feel dark and blurry. Claire and I were curled up on the couch, watching a movie, the wine from dinner making us both warm and sleepy. It was just after 10 when the doorbell rang. Not a polite press, but a frantic, desperate series of rings that cut through the sound of the movie and the rain. We looked at each other, confused. "Are you expecting someone?" Claire asked. I shook my head and got up. I peered through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was Maddie. She was standing on the porch, drenched and shivering, her face pale and streaked with mascara. She was clutching a single, bulging backpack to her chest like a life raft. I threw the door open. "Maddie, honey, what's wrong? What are you doing here?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide and full of a terror I'd never seen before. Her lower lip trembled. "Mom kicked me out," she whispered, her voice cracking. My world narrowed to a single point, my daughter. All thoughts of the movie, the wine, the cozy evening, vanished. My paternal instinct, that primal, fierce thing that had guided me for 18 years, roared to life. I pulled her inside, wrapping my arms around her cold, trembling body. "It's okay. You're okay. Come in. Get warm." Claire was standing by the couch, her hand over her mouth, her expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Maddie, my God, what happened?" I led Maddie to the couch and wrapped her in a thick blanket. She just sat there, shaking, staring at the floor. I knelt in front of her. "Talk to me. Sweetie, what did your mom do? Why would she kick you out?" Maddie took a deep, shuddering breath. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. The silence stretched on, filled only by the sound of the rain and her shaky breathing. I waited. I knew not to push. Finally, she whispered it, the words so quiet I almost didn't hear them. "I'm pregnant." The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Pregnant. My Maddie, my brilliant, responsible daughter who had her whole life ahead of her. The room spun. I felt 100 emotions at once: shock, a flash of white-hot anger at her boyfriend, a wave of disappointment, and then, washing over all of it, an overwhelming sense of pure, undiluted terror for her, for the child who was still a child herself. I looked at her, at the absolute fear on her face, and I knew what I had to do. I reached out and pulled her into a hug, holding her tight as she finally broke down, sobbing into my shoulder. I didn't have the answers. I didn't know what we were going to do, but I knew one thing for certain: it's going to be okay. I murmured into her hair, rocking her gently. "We'll figure this out. Together." I looked up from my daughter's tear-stained face. My eyes met Claire's across the room. She was standing perfectly still, her face a pale, porcelain mask. Her expression wasn't angry or sad. It was something else, something I couldn't name. Not yet. It was a stillness, a quiet calculation. It was the look of someone watching their perfectly planned future crumble into dust. In that moment, I made a promise to my daughter, a promise from the deepest part of my soul. "This is your home, Maddie," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It always will be." After Maddie had cried herself into an exhausted sleep in her old bedroom, I walked back into the living room like a man wading through deep water. The air was thick with unspoken words. Claire was still standing in the same spot, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if to hold her own world together. The forgotten movie played silently on the screen, casting flickering blue light across her face. I switched it off, and we were plunged into a heavy, weighted silence, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain against the roof. "David," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Her mom really just threw her out?" I sank onto the couch, running a hand over my face. My mind was a chaotic jumble of images and fears. Maddie as a little girl on her first day of school. Maddie graduating with a gold cord around her neck. And now this, a terrified child facing an impossible situation. That's what she said. Susan, she can be harsh. She has this idea of tough love that I've never agreed with. She probably thinks this is the only way Maddie will learn a lesson. Claire finally moved, coming to sit on the edge of the armchair opposite me. She wasn't looking at me, but at the dark, rain-streaked window. A lesson. My God. David. She's a kid. She's pregnant and homeless. What kind of a mother? She trailed off, shaking her head. On the surface, it was sympathy. It was the right thing to say. But underneath, I could feel a different current, a tension coiling in the space between us. I know, I said, my voice weary, but that's a fight for another day. Right now, all that matters is that Maddie is here. And she's safe. Of course, Claire said quickly, a little too quickly. Of course, she has to stay here. For now. The last two words hung in the air. For now. It was a qualifier, a boundary being drawn. I was too emotionally drained to address it directly. I just nodded, grateful for any semblance of support. Thank you. I knew you'd understand. It's a lot to process. What is she going to do? Claire asked, her tone shifting from sympathetic to practical. It was one of the things I loved about her, her ability to cut through the emotion and see the logistics. But right now, it felt jarring. I don't know. We haven't even talked about it. Options. I guess there are options. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I didn't want to think about what those options meant. I just wanted to fix this, to turn back time and protect my daughter from this life-altering reality. We sat in silence for another long moment. I could feel Claire watching me, and I knew what she was waiting for. She was waiting for me to say something reassuring. Something like, "This is just temporary." Something like, "Our life won't change." But I couldn't say that, because as I looked toward the hallway that led to my daughter's room, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that everything had changed. The life we had been building, that quiet, child-free future, had just been hit by a wrecking ball. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean and deceptively peaceful. Inside the house, the atmosphere was anything but. I found Maddie in the kitchen, looking small and lost in one of my old college sweatshirts. She was staring into a mug of tea, her face pale and puffy from crying. Her boyfriend, Liam, was sitting beside her. He was a good kid, a nursing student with a kind face. But this morning he just looked like a deer caught in the headlights drift, and completely out of his depth. I kept my voice gentle. "Hey, did you get any sleep?" Maddie shook her head, not looking up. "Not really." We spent the next hour talking. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. I had to push past the part of me that just wanted to hold her and tell her everything would be okay, and be the parent she needed me to be. I had to be practical. They told me they had found out Litesh was already a few months along, due in January. They'd talked about the options, agonized over them, and had decided they wanted to keep the baby. I took a deep breath. "Okay," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. "Okay, if this is what you've decided, then I will support you. But you need to understand what that support looks like. This isn't a free ride." I laid out the rules, for them and for myself. She had to continue with her classes and her job as long as she was able. I would help with the baby so she could work and study. But I wasn't going to be a full-time babysitter for her social life. I told them that the tiny spare room next to hers, the one that housed a treadmill I never used, could become a nursery. I also had to say the hard thing. "And Liam," I said, looking him in the eye, "I like you, but things happen. If, for any reason, you're not in the picture, Maddie will have to file for child support. It's not about punishment. It's about providing for your child." He nodded, his face serious. "I understand, Mr. Miller. I'm not going anywhere." To my surprise, they didn't just listen meekly. They came prepared. They pulled out a notebook and showed me a budget they had started to sketch out, a plan for saving, a list of things they would need. They had been thinking about this. They weren't being completely reckless. It was a small thing, but it was a spark of maturity in a dark and frightening situation. It gave me a glimmer of hope. By the time the conversation was over, we had a fragile, tentative plan. Maddie and the baby would live here for the foreseeable future. That evening, I explained the plan to Claire. I told her about the nursery, about Liam, about their budget. I tried to frame it as a responsible, temporary solution to a crisis. I needed her to be on my side. I needed her to be the partner I thought she was. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "A nursery," she said flatly. The word sounded foreign and ugly coming from her lips. "The room is just collecting dust. Claire, it makes sense." She turned to face me, and the mask of polite concern was gone. Her eyes were hard. "No, David, none of this makes sense. A nursery, a baby, in this house? This is not what I signed up for." The accusation in her voice stung. "She's my daughter, Claire. She's 18 years old and she's terrified. She has nowhere else to go. She's an 18-year-old adult who made an adult decision." She shot back, her voice rising, "And she needs to deal with the adult consequences. Why is that your problem to solve? Why is it our problem?" The word "our" felt like a weapon. "Because I'm her father. It will always be my problem. I will never, ever turn my back on her. So you'll turn your back on me instead?" She cried, her voice cracking with a pain I hadn't expected. "On us, on the life we were supposed to build together, a life that, correct me if I'm wrong, was explicitly supposed to not include raising a baby." I was stunned into silence. She saw our future as a contract, and I had just breached it. For me, this was a crisis to be managed, a fire to be put out. For her, it was a fundamental betrayal of our entire relationship. "That's not fair," I said weakly. "Isn't it?" She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "I moved into your house, David. I arranged my life around you, around us, and you make this decision, this life-altering, house-altering decision, and you just expect me to go along with it, to smile and knit booties and be happy about a screaming baby waking me up at 3 in the morning?" The dam of her composure broke. Tears streamed down her face, tears of anger and frustration. "I love you, but I will not be a casualty of your daughter's mistake. I will not have my life derailed because she was irresponsible. So you need to make a choice. You either tell her she needs to find another place to live, or I will." Her words hit me like a physical blow, an ultimatum. Her or my daughter. It was the most impossible choice. But in my heart, there was no choice at all. There was only my child. "I'm not kicking my pregnant daughter out on the street, Claire." My voice was quiet, but it was steel. Her face crumpled. It was the face of someone who had just lost everything. "Then you've made your choice," she whispered. She turned and walked out of the room, and the silence she left behind was no longer peaceful. It was cold and sharp, and it was the sound of my second chance at happiness dying. The war had begun, and my home had just become the battlefield. The morning after the ultimatum was worse than the fight itself. A fight has noise, energy, a release. The aftermath was a vacuum. I woke up to find the other side of the bed cold. Claire was already up, a departure from our usual routine of waking up together. I found her in the kitchen, dressed for work, nursing a cup of coffee at the counter. She looked as if she hadn't slept at all. Her face was a study in controlled precision, every feature tight, her eyes holding a brittle, glassy sheen. "Morning," I said, my voice sounding rough in the stillness. She didn't look at me. "Good morning, David." Her tone was formal, clipped, the voice of a stranger. She was treating me like a polite but distant business acquaintance. I started to make my own coffee, the familiar ritual feeling alien and clumsy. My hands felt too big, my movements too loud. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. "Are you okay? Can we talk about this? Please don't do this." But the words wouldn't come. Her posture was a fortress, her silence a wall I didn't know how to breach. Then Maddie padded into the kitchen. She stopped short in the doorway, sensing the Arctic chill in the room immediately. Her eyes darted from me to Claire and back again. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I managed a weak smile for her. "Morning. Sweetie, you want some breakfast?" Claire didn't even turn her head. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze fixed on the backsplash. It was a deliberate, calculated act of erasure. She was making it clear that Maddie, to her, did not exist. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Maddie's face fell. "Oh, no. I'm okay. I'm not really hungry." She hovered in the doorway, a ghost in her own home, clearly wanting to retreat, but not wanting to make a sudden move. I felt a surge of anger toward Claire, hot and protective. "Maddie, you have to eat. For the baby," I said, my voice a little too firm. I was trying to parent my daughter, but the words were also a message for Claire. This is real. This is happening. You can't ignore it away. Claire set her mug down in the sink with a sharp clink that made us both flinch. "I'm going to be late," she announced to the room. To no one in particular. She grabbed her purse from the counter, her keys jangling loudly in the silence. She walked toward the door, pausing just beside me. For a second, I thought she might look at me, might say something. Instead, she just stood there, radiating a cold fury. Then she walked out, closing the door softly behind her. The click of the lock sounded like a final judgment. As soon as she was gone, the tension in Maddie's shoulders eased, but it was replaced by a wave of guilt that was painful to watch. "This is my fault," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "She hates me." I went to her and put my arms around her. No, this is not your fault," I insisted, my voice fierce. "This is between me and her. You did nothing wrong by coming to your father for help. Do you hear me?" She nodded, but I knew she didn't believe me. How could she, when the evidence of the wreckage was all around us? The days that followed fell into a miserable pattern. Claire didn't move out. In some ways, that would have been easier. Instead, she stayed, a silent, reproachful presence in our home. She was a master of passive aggression. She'd leave for work before Maddie and I woke up and come home late. After we'd already eaten dinner, when she was home, she would stay in our bedroom with the door closed. If we were in the living room, she'd find a reason to be in the kitchen. She moved through the house like a phantom, leaving behind a trail of icy disapproval. Communication became a twisted game. She would speak to me, but never to Maddie. If she needed to convey something, she'd use me as a conduit, even if Maddie was standing right there. "David, could you let Maddie know that the recycling goes out on Thursday morning?" she'd say, her eyes fixed on me, her voice devoid of all warmth. Maddie, in turn, tried to make herself smaller and smaller. She spent most of her time in her room. She cleaned obsessively, washing dishes that were already clean, wiping down counters that already sparkled. She was trying to earn her place, to be as little of a burden as possible. Every time she left her room, she looked like a soldier stepping onto a minefield, bracing for an explosion. The anxiety was radiating off her in waves, and I knew it couldn't be good for her or the baby. My home, my sanctuary, had become a pressure cooker. I was constantly on edge, trying to mediate a conflict where one party refused to even acknowledge the other's existence. I felt like a failure as a partner and a failure as a father, unable to protect my daughter from the emotional shrapnel flying around our house. About a week into this new, unbearable reality, I decided I couldn't let Claire's hostility dictate everything. Maddie needed things. The baby needed things. We had to move forward, whether Claire was on board or not. "Come on," I said to Maddie one Saturday morning. Claire was supposedly at a yoga class, but I knew she was just avoiding being home. "Let's go shopping." Maddie looked up from her book, her expression wary. "Shopping for what?" "For the grandkid you're about to give me," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "We can start small. Just look around. See what we need." Her face lit up with a flicker of genuine excitement, the first I'd seen in days. Really? Really? Get your shoes on. The trip to the baby store was a brief, welcome escape from the tension. As we walked through aisles stacked high with cribs, strollers, and tiny, impossibly soft clothes, I saw a piece of the old Maddie return. She pointed out a mobile with little felt woodland creatures. She debated the merits of different diaper bags. She held up a tiny pair of yellow socks and laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. For an hour, we were just a father and daughter, excited and nervous about a new life coming into the world. It felt normal. I bought her the first big-ticket item, a top-of-the-line car seat. This is non-negotiable, I told her, tapping the sturdy plastic frame. Safety first. It was inexpensive, practical, and very real symbol of my commitment. It was me telling her, without words, I am here. I am not going anywhere. We are doing this. She hugged me in the middle of the store, her arms tight around my neck. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. The feeling of normalcy shattered the moment we walked back into the house. Claire's car was in the driveway. She was home. We carried our bags inside. Not many, just the car seat and a few smaller things. Claire was on the sofa, reading a magazine. She looked up as we came in, her eyes immediately falling on the large box containing the car seat. She didn't say a word. She just gave it a long, cold look, a look that stripped away all the joy and excitement of the morning. Then she deliberately turned a page in her magazine, dismissing us, dismissing the baby, dismissing our entire existence. Maddie's shoulders slumped. She picked up her smaller bags. I'm just gonna put these in my room, she mumbled, and practically fled down the hall. I was left standing in the living room with the car seat. The box suddenly felt heavy, like a stone. I stood there, feeling foolish and angry. I carried it over and set it down against the wall. A silent declaration. This is here to stay. Claire didn't look up. Later that evening, I found the courage to bring up the next step. I found Claire in the kitchen, wiping down the already immaculate counters. We need to talk about the spare room, I said, keeping my voice even. What about it? She asked, not turning around. The treadmill. I'm going to need to move it out to make space for the crib and a changing table. I can put it in the garage. She stopped wiping and stood perfectly still, her back to me. The silence stretched, tight and thin. Finally, she placed the sponge in the sink and turned to face me. Her face was calm, but her eyes were like chips of ice. It's your house, David, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You can do whatever you want with it. You've made that perfectly clear. And with that, she walked out, leaving me alone in the sterile silence of the kitchen. Her words were not a concession. They were an abdication. She was washing her hands of me, of the house, of this life. She was drawing a line in the sand. And I knew that every step I took toward being the father my daughter needed was a step further away from the woman I loved. The car seat sat in the living room like a monument to my choice, and the treadmill waited in the spare room, a final obstacle between the life I had and the life that was coming. The day I dismantled the treadmill felt like a point of no return. It was a Sunday afternoon, and a pale, watery sunlight filtered through the windows, doing nothing to warm the chill inside the house. Claire had left early that morning, murmuring something about meeting a friend for brunch, an event that I knew could easily stretch into an entire day of avoiding me. Maddie was at her part-time job at the bookstore. I was alone with the silence and my resolve. The spare room was small, barely big enough for the hulking black machine that had served more as a coat rack than a piece of exercise equipment. As I started to unbolt the frame, my mind drifted back to when I bought it. It was a few years after the divorce, a time when my life felt like a chaotic mess of work, single parenting weekends, and takeout containers. I bought the treadmill with a burst of misguided optimism, a promise to myself that I would get back in shape, that I would take control. It was a symbol of a future I was trying to build for myself. Now, I was taking it apart to make room for a future I had never imagined. Every turn of the wrench echoed in the quiet house. It felt symbolic. I was disassembling one version of my life to make space for another. The sleek, adult world represented by Claire and the promise of a self-focused future was being replaced by the practical, demanding reality of a baby. There was a sadness in it, an acknowledgement of a dream being let go. But as I looked at the empty space where the treadmill had been, I also felt something else, a sense of purpose. This room would not be a monument to my failed fitness goals. It would be a nursery. It would be a place of love and safety for my grandchild. For Maddie. When Maddie got home that evening, I showed her the empty room. Stage 1 complete, I announced, trying for a light-hearted tone. Her eyes widened, and a genuine, unburdened smile spread across her face. Wow, Dad, it looks so much bigger. She stepped inside, running her hand along the wall. A crib could go here, she said, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. And a rocking chair over there. For a few minutes, she wasn't a frightened teenager caught in a family drama. She was just an expectant mother, dreaming about her baby. Seeing that look on her face, I knew I had made the right decision. My conviction, however, did little to thaw the Arctic freeze with Claire. When she came home later that night, she walked past the open door of the spare room without a glance. She didn't have to say anything. Her silence was a condemnation. That night, she slept with her back pressed against the far edge of the bed, creating a physical chasm between us that mirrored the emotional one. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I had in years. The war of attrition continued. The house became a landscape of invisible borders and unspoken treaties. We were 3 people living in separate, silent orbits, our paths crossing in hallways and kitchens with the awkwardness of strangers. The weight of it was crushing everyone. Maddie grew quieter, more withdrawn. She started spending more time with Liam, either at the library or at his cramped college apartment with his roommates. I knew she was just trying to be out of the house, out from under the heavy blanket of Claire's disapproval. I tried to talk to Claire, to reason with her. One evening, I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone. I sat down on the other end of the couch. Claire, we can't keep living like this, I said softly. She didn't look up from her screen. I agree. So talk to me. Help me understand what you need. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes tired but sharp. What I need. David, I needed you to consider me. I needed you to be my partner. I needed you to remember the future we agreed on. It's a little late for that now, don't you think? She's my daughter, I repeated, the words feeling worn and useless. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be a father to an adult, not a child, she said, her voice laced with an infuriating calmness. You were supposed to say, Maddie, this is a difficult situation, and I will help you find an apartment. I will help you apply for assistance. But this is my home with Claire, and it is not a solution for you. You were supposed to protect our life, too. Hearing her lay it out so clinically, so rationally, made my stomach turn. In her world, the solution was simple. Boundaries, independence, tough love. But she didn't understand the terror I felt at the thought of my pregnant daughter, trying to navigate that bureaucratic, unforgiving world alone. I can't do that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I won't. I know, she replied, and turned her attention back to her phone. The conversation was over. She had made her argument, and in her mind, she had won. I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one who had broken the rules. The breaking point, the moment that shifted everything from a cold war to an open wound, came from a place I didn't expect. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was working from my home office when the doorbell rang. It was Maddie's friend, Chloe, dropping something off. She was bubbly and sweet, one of Maddie's oldest friends. She was holding a brightly colored gift bag. Hi, Mr. Miller. I just wanted to drop this off for Maddie. A few of us chipped in. It's her first official baby gift, she said, beaming. Maddie came to the door, and her face lit up when she saw the bag. She pulled out the gift. It was a simple white onesie, but on the front, in soft, gray letters, it said, "Grandpa's new co-pilot." A lump formed in my throat. I looked at Maddie, and she was laughing. A pure, happy sound that had been absent from our house for weeks. "Oh my God, Chloe, I love it. It's perfect." At that exact moment, Claire walked in through the garage entrance, her arms full of groceries. She stopped dead, taking in the scene, me, Maddie, Chloe, and the tiny white onesie held up for all to see. The laughter died in Maddie's throat. The joyful energy in the entryway evaporated. Chloe, sensing the sudden shift, made a hasty exit. "Okay, well, I gotta go. Talk to you later." Mads, we were left there. Maddie still holding the onesie. It looked so small, so innocent. To me, it was a symbol of love, of a future, of family. But I could see in Claire's eyes what she saw. She saw an invasion. She saw the concrete, undeniable proof that the life she had fought to keep out of her home had officially breached the walls. It was a declaration of war, printed on 100% cotton. Maddie's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of profound hurt. She looked from the onesie in her hands to Claire's stony face. I'm just going to put this in my room," she stammered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She turned and fled down the hall, clutching the gift to her chest. I turned to Claire, my own heart aching for my daughter. "Did you have to do that?" I asked, my voice low and shaking with anger. "Do what, David?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm as she began to unload the groceries. "Did I have to come home? To my own house? You know what I mean. The look on your face. You couldn't just let her have one single moment of happiness?" She slammed a carton of milk onto the counter. "Happiness? You want to talk about happiness? My happiness doesn't seem to factor into any of this, does it? There's a baby-sized wedge being driven between us, and you expect me to be happy about it? To applaud a onesie that says Grandpa's co-pilot when I feel like my own life is in a nosedive? It's not a wedge, Claire. It's my daughter," I yelled, finally losing control. "My daughter who needs me. And what about me?" She screamed back, tears of rage and hurt finally spilling down her cheeks. "What about what I need? I need a partner. I need the man who promised me a future, not the man who is willing to sacrifice it all for a past he's already lived. You're not just her father anymore, David. You're supposed to be my partner." The raw pain in her voice silenced me. We stood there, breathing heavily in the aftermath of the explosion. The kitchen filled with the wreckage of our relationship. And down the hall, I could hear the faint, heartbreaking sound of my daughter quietly sobbing in her room. The house wasn't big enough for all of this pain. Someone was going to break, and I was terrified it was going to be my little girl. The explosion left a toxic fallout that permeated every corner of the house. The fragile pretense of civility was gone, replaced by an overt, simmering hostility from Claire and a deepening, sorrowful retreat from Maddie. I was caught in the poisonous crossfire, trying to deflect the blows aimed at my daughter while desperately trying to salvage something, anything, from my relationship with the woman I thought I was going to marry. A few days later, a call from my ex-wife, Susan, managed to make a terrible situation even worse. I was in the garage, trying to organize the chaos to make room for the dismantled treadmill, when my phone rang. Seeing her name flash on the screen filled me with a familiar sense of dread. "Hello, Susan," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "David," she began, her tone clipped and businesslike. There was no preamble. "No, how are you? I'm calling about Maddie. I assume she's still with you." "Of course she is. Where else would she be?" I snapped, my patience already worn thin. "Well, it's been a few weeks. I figured she would have come to her senses by now, or that you would have, at least." I stopped what I was doing, leaning against my workbench. "Come to her senses? Susan, she's pregnant and scared. She needs support, not judgment." I could practically hear her roll her eyes through the phone. She needs a dose of reality. David, that's what she needs. You're coddling her. You always have. You're letting her believe that there are no consequences for her actions. She's living in her childhood bedroom. You're probably paying for everything. And she gets to play house without any of the real-world pressure. How is that helping her? I'm helping her by not throwing her out on the street. My voice was rising, and I fought to keep it down. You're not helping. You're enabling. She insisted. She needs to get a full-time job, find a cheap apartment with that boyfriend of hers, and figure out how to stand on her own feet. That's how she'll learn. By letting her live in this fantasy world. You're just setting her up for a harder fall later on. And what about your girlfriend? I can't imagine Claire is thrilled about this new arrangement. Her words were like sharp little daggers, each one hitting a nerve. The fact that her cold, pragmatic view so closely mirrored Claire's was not lost on me. In their eyes, I was the problem. My love for my daughter was a weakness, a flaw in my character that was ruining everything. Claire and I are handling it. I lied, the words tasting like acid. Are you? She challenged. Good luck with that. Just don't come crying to me when this all blows up in your face. I warned you. She hung up. I stood in the silence of the garage, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. The conversation had left me shaken. Susan had a way of getting under my skin, of making me doubt my own instincts. Was I coddling Maddie? Was I just postponing an inevitable, painful lesson? I looked at the boxed-up treadmill parts and the car seat still waiting by the door. No, I thought, trying to shore up my conviction. I'm being a father. That's all. That evening, the fragile piece of the house was shattered again. I was in the kitchen making dinner, and Maddie was sitting at the table, quietly doing some homework for her online community college class. It was a rare moment of domestic calm. Then Claire came home. She walked in, put her briefcase down, and surveyed the scene. Her eyes were hard, her jaw tight. She didn't say hello. She walked to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. David, she said, her back to us. Did you get my email? No, I haven't checked it yet. What's up? I forwarded you a few apartment listings, she said. Turning around, she leaned against the counter, taking a slow sip of water. She was deliberately ignoring Maddie, but the words were clearly meant for her. There are some decent one-bedrooms available over in Beaverton. A bit of a commute for Liam, I suppose, but the rent is manageable, especially with 2 incomes and state assistance. The air went still. My hand froze over the pot I was stirring. I looked at Maddie. All the color had drained from her face. She was staring at Claire, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. She looked like she had been slapped. Claire, I said, my voice a low warning. What are you doing? I'm being proactive. She replied, her voice smooth and reasonable. I'm helping. Susan was right. You know, we're not doing Maddie any favors by letting her hide from the real world here. She needs a plan. She needs a place of her own. The casual mention of Susan, the fact that they had apparently been discussing my daughter behind my back, sent a fresh wave of fury through me. You talked to Susan. She called me, Claire said with a shrug, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She's worried, too. She agrees that the situation isn't healthy for anyone, especially not for Maddie in the long run. That was it. That was the moment I saw it all with a blinding, heartbreaking clarity. This wasn't just about Claire's desire for a child-free life anymore. This had become a crusade. She and Susan, 2 women with vastly different relationships to Maddie, had formed an unholy alliance, united in their belief that my daughter needed to be pushed out of the nest. Consequences be damned. They were framing their cruelty as concern, their selfishness as practicality. Get out, I whispered, the words thick with rage. Claire looked startled. What? I said. Get out of the kitchen, I said, my voice growing louder. Right now. Go. Before the fight could escalate. Maddie pushed her chair back, the sound of the legs scraping against the floor painfully loud. No. It's okay. Dad, she said. her voice trembling. She couldn't look at either of us. She gathered her books, her hands shaking so badly she dropped a pen. It clattered on the floor, and she scrambled to pick it up, tears now streaming down her face. She's right. I need to. I'm just gonna go to my room. She fled, leaving behind a silence that was more damning than any shout could ever be. I turned on Claire, my entire body shaking. Are you proud of yourself? I snarled. Is this what you wanted? To break that girl's heart? To make her feel so completely and utterly unwelcome that she can't even sit in her own kitchen? Don't you dare turn this on me. She shot back, her own control finally snapping. I am trying to solve a problem that you refuse to face. Your daughter is not a child. She is about to have a child of her own. When does she start taking responsibility for that? When? She is taking responsibility. I roared. She's going to school. She's working. She's making a budget with her boyfriend. What more do you want from her? I want her out of my home. She screamed, the words echoing in the sudden silence that followed. I want my life back. The life you promised me. The words hung between us, ugly and irrevocable. My home. Not our home. My home. She still saw herself as a guest, a long-term visitor whose terms and conditions had been violated, and she wanted the previous arrangement restored. That night, I lay awake long after Claire's breathing had evened out into sleep. The anger had subsided, replaced by a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. I kept replaying the scene in the kitchen, the look on Maddie's face as she scrambled to pick up her pen, as if she were gathering the shattered pieces of her own worth from the floor. I had brought her here promising safety, a sanctuary from her mother's harsh judgment. Instead, I had led her into a different kind of war, a psychological battle that was wounding her in ways I couldn't see, but I could feel. I got out of bed and walked down the hall. I stood outside her door, listening. I could hear the faint sound of her quietly crying. It was a muffled, broken sound, the sound of someone trying to weep without being heard, of someone trying to make their own sorrow as small and unobtrusive as possible. And in that moment, I understood. Maddie didn't just feel unwelcome. She felt like a burden, a mistake, a problem to be solved. And I, in my desperate attempt to keep the peace, in my foolish hope that I could somehow have both the woman I loved and the daughter I adored, had allowed it to happen. The silence from her room was the sound of my failure, and it was the sound that would lead her to the most desperate decision of all. The days following the fight were a new level of awful. The house was no longer just a battlefield. It was a tomb. The silence was heavy and suffocating, thick with resentment and unspoken grief. Claire and I had nothing left to say to each other. We were two strangers sharing a mortgage and a king-sized bed, each of us clinging to our own side of a mattress that felt like a continent. The loving, laughing woman I had fallen for was gone, replaced by a ghost haunting the hallways, her face a perpetual mask of weary disappointment. But the most significant change was in Maddie. She became a master of invisibility. She moved through the house with a stealthy quietness, as if trying not to disturb the air. She ate meals in her room. She washed her own dishes the second she was done with them, scrubbing them silently and putting them away, leaving no trace she was ever there. She timed her bathroom trips for when she knew no one would be in the hall. It was a heartbreaking performance of self-effacement. She was trying to shrink herself, to minimize her own existence, in the desperate hope that if she became small enough, she would stop being a problem. I tried to draw her out. I'd knock on her door with a peace offering of her favorite ice cream. I'd suggest we watch a movie, just the two of us, like we used to. She would agree, but her presence was hollow. She'd sit beside me on the couch, her body tense, her eyes fixed on the screen, but seeing nothing. The easy, comfortable rapport we'd shared our whole lives was gone, replaced by a strained formality. She was being polite to me, and it was the most painful thing in the world. She was treating me like a landlord she was afraid of upsetting, not her dad. Her phone became her lifeline and her escape. I'd often see her huddled in a corner, texting furiously, a brief, sad smile sometimes touching her lips. I knew she was talking to Liam, probably to her friends, the only people in the world she could talk to without feeling like a burden. Part of me was grateful she had that outlet, but another, selfish part of me felt a pang of jealousy. She was pulling away from me, retreating into a world where I couldn't reach her, because her own home had become a place of pain. The breaking point, final, quiet snap that I failed to see coming happened on a Thursday night. I came home from a late meeting at work, exhausted and dreading the walk through my own front door. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of a lamp in the living room. I found Maddie curled up on the armchair, asleep. Her laptop was open on the floor beside her, the screen glowing with the home page of her community college's online portal. An empty mug sat on the side table. For a moment, it looked peaceful, a picture of normalcy. Then I saw her face. Even in sleep, it was etched with worry. Her brow was furrowed, her lips pressed into a tight, unhappy line. Tucked under her hand was her phone. As I watched, it lit up with an incoming text. I couldn't help but glance at the screen. It was from Liam. The message read, "Are you sure about this? Mads, we can figure something else out. Please don't do this." A cold dread washed over me. Do what? What were they talking about? I looked back at her sleeping face, so young and so troubled, and a powerful, protective instinct surged through me. She was hiding something. She was planning something, and it was big enough to scare her boyfriend. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was she thinking of dropping out of school, moving in with Liam and his 3 roommates, or something worse? The ugly options I thought we had put behind us suddenly came roaring back. I felt a desperate urge to wake her up, to demand she tell me what was going on. But what right did I have? I had failed to make her feel safe enough to confide in me. This was the result, secrets and desperate plans made in the dead of night. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding, and went to my own room, feeling utterly helpless. That night, the house was alive with a restless energy. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, sounded like a warning. Sometime after midnight, I heard a floorboard squeak in the hallway, followed by the soft click of a door. I told myself it was just Maddie going to the bathroom. I forced myself to lie still, to not give in to the paranoia. I must have eventually drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. The silence was the first thing I noticed when I woke up. A deep, hollow silence that felt wrong in my bones. It was the same silence from the vision that had haunted me, a premonition I had pushed aside. This time it was real. I lay there for a moment, listening. There was no sound of the shower running, no soft footsteps in the kitchen, just nothing. I got out of bed and walked down the hall, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The dread was a physical thing now, a heavy weight in my chest. I pushed open Maddie's door. The bed was made, perfectly, military crisp. The room was neat, almost empty. The little personal touches, photos of her friends, the stack of books on her nightstand, the little ceramic cat she'd had since she was 10 were gone. A neat pile of freshly laundered towels sat on the dresser, the ones she had used that week. It was the room of a polite guest who had just checked out. And there, placed squarely in the middle of the pillow, was the single, folded piece of paper, the note. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely pick it up. My breath caught in my throat. I unfolded it. It wasn't long, just a few lines in her familiar, looping handwriting. "Dear Dad, I'm so sorry for all the trouble I've caused. I never wanted to come between you and Claire. I see how happy she makes you, and I've ruined that. All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy. Please don't worry about me. Liam and I have a plan. I'll be safe. It's better this way. You and Claire can have your life back now. Don't try to find me. Please, just be happy. I love you more than anything. Love, Maddie." The note slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. The air rushed out of my lungs, leaving me gasping, dizzy. The words echoed in my head. "I've ruined that. It's better this way. Just be happy." She had absorbed all the blame, all the toxicity in this house, and taken it upon herself. She had misinterpreted the tension, the arguments, the cold silences, not as a conflict between me and Claire, but as a simple equation. Her presence equaled my unhappiness. And to solve the problem, she had removed herself from it. She hadn't just left. She had run away. My pregnant, 18-year-old daughter was out there somewhere, alone, believing she was a burden too great to be borne. The carefully constructed walls of my denial, my hope that I could manage this, that I could fix this, came crashing down. I hadn't managed anything. I had failed. I had stood by while my daughter was made to feel so worthless, so unwelcome in her own home, that her only option was to disappear into the cold, gray Portland morning. The silence in the house was no longer just a lack of sound. It was the sound of my daughter's absence. It was the sound of my heart breaking. The note felt like a ghost in my hand as I walked out of Maddie's empty room. The world had taken on a dreamlike, muffled quality, as if I were moving underwater. Each step down the hallway was a monumental effort. The note contained so few words, yet they held the weight of everything I had failed to see, everything I had failed to do. I want you to be happy. The irony was a physical pain, a hot poker twisting in my gut. My happiness? It had just walked out the door in the dead of night, carrying my unborn grandchild with it. I found Claire in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter, calmly making a smoothie, the whir of the blender the only sound in the house. She was dressed in her stylish yoga clothes, ready to start her Saturday with a cleansing routine, oblivious to the fact that our world had just been poisoned beyond repair. She looked up as I entered, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at my disheveled state. "You're up early," she said, her voice neutral. She was still adhering to the rules of our Cold War, keeping her tone detached, impersonal. I didn't answer. I walked over to the kitchen island and placed the note on the cool granite surface, right beside her perfectly arranged array of supplements and organic protein powder. I pushed it toward her. My hand was steady now. The panic had receded, replaced by a crystalline, Arctic rage. She looked from my face to the note, a small frown creasing her brow. She picked it up and read it. I watched her face, searching for some sign of remorse, of shock, of anything other than cool assessment. Her expression barely changed. She read it once, then a second time. Finally, she placed it back on the counter, carefully aligning it with the edge. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her smoothie. "Well," she said, her voice still maddeningly calm, "she's an adult, David. She's made a decision. Maybe this is for the best. For the best." The 3 words landed in the silent kitchen with the force of a detonation. In that single, breathtakingly callous moment, everything I had felt for her love, the affection, the hope for a shared future evaporated. It wasn't just that she didn't love my daughter. It was that she was utterly incapable of understanding my love for her. She saw Maddie's desperate, heartbreaking flight as a solution, a neat and tidy resolution to the inconvenient problem that had disrupted her life. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I didn't see the woman I loved. I saw a stranger whose pristine, orderly world had no room for the messy, unpredictable, unconditional love that comes with being a parent. "The best," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "For the best. My daughter, my pregnant daughter, is out there somewhere, terrified and alone, because she believes she ruined my life. She thinks the only way I can be happy is if she disappears. And you think that's for the best." She finally had the grace to look unsettled. A flicker of defensiveness crossed her face. "That's not what I meant. I just mean, maybe this is the catalyst she needed to finally take charge of her own life. She says she has a plan with Liam." "A plan?" My voice rose, a raw, ragged sound. "She's a child, Claire, a child playing at being a grown-up because Webbeckhouse made her feel like she had no other choice. Her plan is to run away from a home where she was treated like an intruder, an inconvenience." I picked up the note, my hand crushing the delicate paper. "This isn't a declaration of independence. This is a suicide note for a relationship. The relationship between a father and a daughter that you helped poison. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You and Susan. With your tough love and your practicality. You wanted her out. Well, congratulations. You won. Tears were streaming down my face now. Hot tears of fury and grief. I wasn't just mourning Maddie's absence. I was mourning the end of us. It was over. I could see it with a horrifying clarity. There was no coming back from this. David, that's not fair, she said, her own voice starting to tremble. She was losing her composure, seeing that her calm, rational approach was useless against the storm of my pain. I never wanted her to get hurt. I just wanted our life back. Our life? I laughed. A harsh, broken sound. There is no our life anymore. There is just my life. And in my life, my daughter comes first. Always. No matter what. I thought you understood that. I thought you could at least respect it. But you don't. You see her as a problem to be managed, an obstacle to your happiness. I took a step toward her, and she flinched. I stopped. I didn't want to scare her. I just wanted her to understand, to see the chasm that had opened between us, a chasm so deep and wide it could never be crossed. I'm going to go find her, I said, my voice dropping, suddenly flat and devoid of all emotion. I'm going to find my daughter. And I'm going to bring her home. And what about me? She whispered, her face pale. What happens then? It was the question that had been hanging over us for weeks. The ultimatum she had given me, now thrown back in her face by circumstance. But the choice was no longer difficult. It wasn't even a choice. I looked at her one last time, at the beautiful face of the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. And I felt nothing but a profound and desolate sadness for what we had lost, for what she had been unable to give. I think you know the answer to that, I said softly. I turned and walked away. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and my wallet from the counter. I didn't look back. As I walked out the front door, into the cold, gray morning, I heard her finally start to cry. It was a thin, lonely sound, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every second I wasted was a second my daughter was out there alone, believing she was unloved. I got in my car, my mind a frantic blur. Where would she go? What was her plan? I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. My first call was to Liam. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when he finally answered, his voice thick with sleep. Mr. Miller. Liam, I said, my voice tight with urgency. It's David. Maddie's gone. She left a note. She said you'd had a plan. You have to tell me where she is. Now. There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by a string of panicked curses. Oh, God. I told her not to. I told her it was a terrible idea. He stammered. She made me promise not to tell you. Liam, so help me God. If you don't tell me where she is right now, I let the threat hang in the air. She was going to take a bus, he said, his voice cracking. To Seattle. She has a cousin up there. A second cousin or something. She thought she could stay with her for a while. Get a job. She was going to go to the Greyhound station downtown. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. A destination. A place to start. When was she leaving? The first bus is at 7:30. I think. She wanted to be there early. Oh, God. Mr. Miller. I'm so sorry. I tried to talk her out of it. It's not your fault, son, I said, my voice softening. It was true. He was just a kid, caught in the middle of a mess he didn't create. Just stay by your phone. I'll call you. I hung up and started the car, peeling away from the curb, my tires screeching in protest. The Greyhound station. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It was almost 7. I had to get there. I drove through the empty Saturday morning streets of Portland, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My entire world had narrowed to a single, desperate mission: find Maddie, bring her home, and prove to her, once and for all, that she was not a burden. She was everything. The Greyhound station was a pocket of weary, transient humanity in the quiet dawn of the city. People slumped in hard plastic chairs under the harsh fluorescent lights, their faces pale and drawn. The air smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and the faint, underlying scent of desperation. It was a place for departures and escapes, and my daughter was somewhere inside, about to make the biggest escape of her life. I parked the car in a red zone, not caring about the ticket, and ran inside. My eyes scanned the cavernous room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I searched the faces of the people waiting in line, the ones huddled over worn-out luggage, the ones staring blankly at the departures board. For a terrifying minute, I didn't see her. A wave of nausea washed over me. What if Liam was wrong? What if she'd already left? What if she was on a bus, hurtling up the highway, further and further away from me? Then I saw her. She was tucked away in a corner, as far from the main flow of traffic as she could get. She was trying to make herself invisible, just like she had at home. She had her backpack on the chair beside her, her arms wrapped around her stomach in a protective, maternal gesture. Her face was buried in the collar of her jacket, and her shoulders were shaking with tiny, silent sobs. She looked so small, so young, so utterly and completely alone. The sight of her broke my heart all over again. I walked toward her slowly, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. I didn't want to startle her. When I was a few feet away, I called her name, my voice softer than I intended. Maddie. Her head snapped up, her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, widened in disbelief, then filled with a fresh wave of panic. She looked like a cornered animal, ready to bolt. She instinctively grabbed her backpack. Dad, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. I got your note, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I took another step closer and sat down on the chair next to hers, leaving a small space between us. I came to get you. No, she whispered, shaking her head frantically. No, you can't. I have to go. It's for the best. For you. For me. I asked, my voice cracking. Maddie, look at me. Do I look happy to you? My happiness left with you this morning. My happiness is sitting right here in this bus station, about to run away from the one person in the world who loves her more than life itself. Tears were streaming down her face now. But Claire, you two were fighting because of me. I heard you. I ruined everything. She makes you happy. Dad, you deserve to have that. It was time for the truth. The hard, painful, liberating truth. I reached out and gently took her hand. It was ice cold. Sweetheart, Claire and I weren't fighting because of you. We were fighting because of who we are. I am a father. It is the most important part of my identity. And she is a woman who does not want to be a part of that. You didn't ruin anything that wasn't already broken. You showed us the cracks. I squeezed her hand. My relationship with Claire ending is not your fault. It is my responsibility. But letting my daughter feel so alone that she has to run away, that is my fault. And I am so sorry. I am sorry I didn't protect you from the tension in that house. I am sorry I made you feel like you had to shrink, like you had to disappear. That is my deepest regret, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. She was sobbing openly now, the deep, ragged cries of a child whose heart was breaking. I pulled her into my arms, and she collapsed against me, her small body trembling. I held her tight, just like I did when she was a little girl who'd scraped her knee, rocking her gently amidst the indifferent hustle of the bus station. You are not a burden, I whispered into her hair, my own tears soaking her jacket. You are not a mistake. You are my daughter, and your home is with me. Always. We sat like that for a long time, until her sobs subsided into quiet, hiccuping breaths. I didn't let go. I felt like if I did, she might vanish into thin air. Finally, she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What about Claire? She asked, her voice small. I looked at her, my expression unwavering. Claire and I are over. That's my choice. Maddie, not yours. Mine. My choice is you. My choice is this baby. I gently placed my hand on her stomach. My choice is my family. A fragile, watery smile touched her lips. Yeah, I said, my own smile feeling more real than it had in weeks. Now, what do you say we get out of here? I'm thinking we could use a big, greasy, celebratory breakfast. And then we have a nursery to build. Her smile widened. She nodded, a look of profound relief washing over her face, clearing away the fear and guilt that had clouded it for so long. She looked like my Maddie again. The drive home was quiet, but it was a comfortable, healing silence. We didn't need to talk. Everything that needed to be said had been said in the cold, impersonal anonymity of the bus station. When we pulled into the driveway, Claire's car was gone. We walked into the house together. It felt different, lighter. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on us was gone. In the living room, a key was sitting on the coffee table with a short, simple note beside it. I'll have movers get the rest of my things next week. I wish you both the best. See. I picked up the key and slipped it into my pocket. It was a sad, quiet end to a significant chapter of my life. There was a pang of loss, of what could have been. But as I looked at Maddie, standing in the middle of the room, looking around at the home she had finally, truly returned to, I knew I had made the right choice, the only choice. She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I knew what she was asking. Are you okay? I nodded, a real smile spreading across my face. I'm okay, I said. We're okay. She returned the smile, and in that shared moment of understanding, I felt the broken pieces of my world begin to knit themselves back together. Later that afternoon, we stood in the empty spare room, the pale sunlight streaming through the window. It was no longer a place of conflict or a symbol of a life I was leaving behind. It was a blank canvas. It was a promise. So, I said, clapping my hands together, where do you think the crib should go? Maddie laughed, a clear, happy sound that filled the empty room and chased away the last of the shadows. Definitely by the window, she said, her eyes sparkling with a hope I thought had been lost for good. We stood there together, father and daughter, on the cusp of a new and uncertain future. It wasn't the future I had planned, and it certainly wasn't the future she had dreamed of. It was going to be hard, and messy, and complicated. But as we began to imagine the room, to fill the silence with plans and dreams, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that we were exactly where we were supposed to be. We were home, and we would face it all together.